A single night, a single comment, a single sneer from a billionaire's girlfriend aimed at a waitress with a foreign accent. It was a moment of casual cruelty meant to be forgotten by morning. But what happens when the world you believe you own is built on a foundation of sand? What happens when the woman you dismiss as insignificant holds the key to your entire future? Because the next morning in a boardroom where a multi-billion-dollar empire hangs in the balance, that same waitress walks in, and she's not there to serve coffee. She's there to buy the table. Stay tuned, because this is a story of how a quiet voice can become the loudest sound in the room. The air in Celestine was different. It wasn't just filtered or temperature controlled. It was rarefied, thinned by the sheer altitude of the wealth it contained. From her vantage point near the service station, Elara Vance had become a connoisseur of this atmosphere. She could tell the difference between old money, a quiet, confident hum, and new money, which crackled with a desperate electric need for validation. Tonight, the crackle was deafening. Elara adjusted the knot of her black apron, the starched fabric of familiar comfort against the silk of her uniform. Her feet, encased in sensible, professionally cushioned black shoes, ached with a dull throb that had become a part of her daily existence. For the past 6 weeks, she had been Ella, the new waitress from Poland, quiet, efficient, and largely invisible. Her English, carefully learned and meticulously practiced, still carried the gentle lilt of her mother tongue, a soft cadence that rounded the sharp edges of New York English. To some it was charming. To others it was a target. Her gaze swept across the dining room, a sea of white linen, gleaming silverware, and softly glowing crystal. She wasn't just looking. She was cataloging. The couple in the corner celebrating an anniversary, their conversation a soft murmur of shared history. The trio of lawyers near the window, their voices sharp and predatory as they dissected a merger over seared scallops. And then there was Table 7, the prime reservation, the one everyone had been buzzing about since the booking was made. Julian Croft and Tiffany Davenport. Julian was the heir to the Oratech empire, a legacy teetering on the brink of either revolutionary success or catastrophic failure. Elara had read every filing, every press release, every analyst's report on his company. She knew he was under immense pressure. It showed in the tight set of his jaw and the way his eyes, a startlingly clear shade of blue, seemed to be staring at something 1,000 miles away, even as he looked at the woman seated opposite him. He had his father's looks, but according to the whispers on Wall Street, none of his legendary nerve. Tiffany Davenport was an accessory. A stunningly beautiful, impeccably dressed, and exquisitely polished accessory. Her dress was a sliver of crimson silk that probably cost more than Elara's rent for the entire year. Her blonde hair was a marvel of engineering, cascading in perfect, effortless waves. Her laughter, which she deployed frequently, was a high, tinkling sound that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was a performance artist, and her stage was Julian Croft's life. Elara approached their table, her water pitcher held steady. "Good evening. May I offer you some water to begin? We have still or sparkling." Julian looked up, his focus momentarily pulled back into the room. "Still is fine, thank you." His voice was tired. Tiffany, however, kept her gaze fixed on her diamond-encrusted phone. She waved a dismissive hand adorned with rings that caught the light like trapped stars. "And get us a bottle of the '09 Lafite. The real one, not the second label you probably push on tourists." Elara gave a small, polite nod. "Of course, madam, an excellent choice." She moved to pour Julian's water, her movements fluid and economical. As she leaned in, a wisp of her dark brown hair escaped its tight bun. She felt Tiffany's eyes on her, cold and analytical. "Where are you from?" Tiffany asked, her tone less a question and more an interrogation. Her phone was finally down on the table. Elara straightened up, pitcher in hand. "I am from Poland, madam." A slow, predatory smile spread across Tiffany's face. She glanced at Julian, seeking an audience. "Poland," she repeated, drawing the word out as if it tasted strange. "Oh, that explains it. I couldn't quite place that accent." She said the word accent as if it were a contagion. Julian shifted uncomfortably. "Tiffany, please." "What, I'm just making an observation," she said, her voice a little too loud. "It's just so thick. You must have to try so hard to make people understand you. Do they have you repeat orders all the time? It must be exhausting." The other tables were distant islands, but for Elara, the world had shrunk to the few square feet of Persian rug beneath her feet. Every nerve ending prickled. This wasn't the first time. In her life, she had faced far worse than the petty cruelty of a bored socialite. She remembered the gnawing hunger of lean years in Warsaw, the cold sting of rejection from academic programs, the brutal sleepless nights spent building her first company from a drafty apartment that smelled of boiled cabbage and old paper. The memory was a cloak of armor. She kept her expression serene, a professional mask she had perfected. "I manage quite well, thank you," Ilara replied, her voice even. "Is there anything else I can get for you before the wine?" Her composure seemed to infuriate Tiffany more than any argument could have. It was a denial of her power. "Actually, yes," Tiffany snapped, leaning forward. "Could you try saying a bottle of bubbling water for me? I just want to hear it. For fun." She giggled, a sharp, unpleasant sound. Julian's face flushed with embarrassment. "Tiffany, that's enough. Apologize to her. Apologize for what I'm just curious about her adorable little accent." She insisted, her smile now a brittle, painted-on thing. Ilara met Tiffany's gaze. For a fraction of a second, the mask slipped. In her dark eyes, there was no fear, no shame. There was a flicker of something ancient and unyielding. It was the look of a person who had calculated 1,000 variables and had already arrived at the answer. It was a look of profound disappointment. She didn't give Tiffany the satisfaction of the performance. Instead, she turned her attention fully to Julian. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the tension with the precision of a scalpel. "Sir, your company, Auratech, is currently trading at a 7-year low. Your Q3 earnings report missed projections by 12%, and your primary patent on the Helios neural interface is set to expire in 18 months, with no viable successor announced. You have a $30 million debt call due at the end of this fiscal quarter, and your current burn rate suggests you'll be insolvent by next May." The air left the space around table 7. Julian's mouth fell slightly open. The color drained from his face, replaced by a ghastly white. He looked as if she had just recited the secret code to his personal safe. Tiffany stared, utterly baffled. "What did you just say?" Ilara ignored her. Her eyes were locked on Julian. "My accent may be difficult for your companion to understand, Mr. Croft, but I assure you my numbers are perfectly clear. I will get your wine." She turned and walked away, her back ramrod straight. She didn't look back to see the wreckage she had left behind. She could feel Julian's stunned gaze following her, a physical weight. She could feel Tiffany's sputtering indignation. In the sanctuary of the service station, she took a deep, steadying breath. Her hands were perfectly still. The manager, Mr. Gable, hurried over, his face etched with concern. "Ella, what happened over there? Mrs. Davenport looks like she's about to incinerate someone." "She was displeased with my pronunciation," Ilara said calmly, retrieving the wine key from her apron pocket. "And you responded by quoting their stock portfolio?" he asked, his voice a squeak of disbelief. "It seemed relevant," Ilara said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "Don't worry, Mr. Gable. I'll handle it." For the rest of the evening, she served their table with impeccable, almost glacial professionalism. Tiffany shot daggers at her, with every glance occasionally whispering furiously to a shell-shocked Julian who could barely look at Ilara. He was rattled not by her knowledge, but by the impossible context of it. The waitress, the Polish waitress with the thick accent. How could she possibly know? When they finally left, Tiffany made a point of leaving no tip, just a single penny placed pointedly in the center of the leather bill folder. It was the final petty gesture of a battle she thought she had won. As Ilara cleared the table, she picked up the penny and held it in her palm. It was warm from Tiffany's touch. She looked at its copper gleam under the soft restaurant lights. It wasn't an insult, it was a confirmation of everything she needed to know about the culture surrounding Julian Croft. Later that night, long after her shift had ended, Ilara sat in her Spartan but clean apartment in a much less glamorous part of the city. Her laptop was open, the Auratech logo glowing on the screen. She initiated a secure video call. A man's face appeared, older, with kind eyes and a sharp suit. Arthur Finch, her lawyer and confidant for a decade. "So," Arthur said without preamble, "how was your final shift in the food service industry?" Ilara leaned back, finally allowing the tension of the day to leave her shoulders. "Enlightening. I met our CEO. And his girlfriend," she said. She recounted the evening's events in a calm, factual tone, detailing Tiffany's mockery and her own calculated response. Arthur listened patiently, a frown deepening on his forehead. That's appalling. Are you sure you want to go through with this, Ilara? The man has questionable judgment, to say the least. His judgment in his personal life is a symptom, not the disease, Ilara countered, her voice firm. He allowed it to happen. He was weak, complacent. That's the culture that is letting Oratech die. He's so distracted by the noise that he can't see the structural rot. But the foundation his father built, that's still sound. The engineers are brilliant. The core technology is salvageable. It's not him I'm investing in, Arthur. It's the potential he's squandering. She looked down at the penny still sitting on her desk. She thought she was leaving me a message about my worth, she said softly. But she was really leaving me a message about his. What's your final decision? Arthur asked. Ilara looked back at the screen, her eyes clear and resolute. We proceed. The meeting is at 9 a.m. Send the final wire transfer. And Arthur, she added, have a car ready for me at 8. Something appropriate. I believe my waitress uniform is due for retirement. The 6 a.m. alarm was a predator tearing Julian Croft from a restless, shallow sleep filled with cascading stock tickers and the ghost of a Polish accent. He slammed his hand down on the snooze button, the sound echoing in the cavernous, minimalist bedroom. The sprawling penthouse with its panoramic views of Central Park felt less like a home and more like an opulent prison. Every sleek designer surface seemed to mock him, a testament to a level of success he felt he hadn't earned and was about to lose. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, the cool marble floor a shock to his system. His head throbbed. The incident at Celestine replayed in his mind a mortifying loop of Tiffany's cruelty and the waitress's impossible surgical response. How could a random waitress know the intimate details of his company's financial despair? It felt like a hallucination, a stress-induced fever dream. He glanced at the other side of the king-sized bed. Tiffany was still asleep, a portrait of serene beauty, her blonde hair fanned out on the silk pillowcase. Looking at her, a knot of something cold and unfamiliar tightened in his gut. Last night, for the first time, he hadn't seen a beautiful, vibrant woman. He had seen a liability. Her casual cruelty, which he had once dismissed as a part of her fiery personality, now seemed like a dangerous flaw, a reflection of his own poor judgment. The waitress hadn't just embarrassed Tiffany, she had held up a mirror to him, and he hadn't liked the reflection. Jewel, what time is it? Tiffany murmured, her voice thick with sleep. It's early. Go back to sleep, he said, his tone clipped. He walked into the enormous bathroom and turned on the shower, the deluge of hot water doing little to wash away his anxiety. Today was everything. The 9 a.m. meeting was his last hope. An enigmatic investment group, EV Capital, had emerged from nowhere, expressing interest in a massive, controlling stake investment. They had been ruthlessly efficient, conducting their initial due diligence through a third-party firm with terrifying speed. No one at Oratech had met the principal. They were a ghost, a name on a term sheet, a potential savior or executioner. If EV Capital backed out, it was over. The debt call would be triggered. The board, already sharpening their knives, would oust him. The company his father had poured his life into building would be carved up and sold for parts. His father's legacy, his legacy would be one of failure. The weight of it was a physical thing pressing down on his chest, making it hard to breathe. After his shower, he stood in his walk-in closet, a room larger than most New York apartments. He chose his armor for the day, a dark navy Tom Ford suit, a crisp white shirt, a conservative silk tie. As he knotted the tie, his reflection stared back at him, a man playing the part of a CEO. Tiffany appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a silk robe. You're so tense, darling. It's just a meeting. It's not just a meeting, Tiff. It's the meeting, he said, his frustration leaking into his voice. The future of the entire company depends on the next 3 hours. Sure, well, you'll be brilliant, you always are, she said with an airy confidence that showed she didn't grasp the stakes at all. Listen, I was thinking, after you close your big deal, we should go to St. Bart's for a week. We deserve it. Last night was so stressful. That horrible little waitress completely ruined the mood. Julian froze, his hand still on his tie. She ruined the mood, or you did by publicly humiliating someone just trying to do her job. Tiffany scoffed. Oh, don't be so dramatic. She was rude, and you heard what she said. How dare she speak to you like that? You should have had her fired on the spot. She quoted our quarterly earnings report, Tiffany. I'm more concerned with how she knew that than with her tone. He shot back. She probably read it somewhere. Who cares, she's a nobody, Tiffany said, walking over to adjust his tie with a proprietary air. The important thing is that you go in there today, you flash that charming Croft smile, and you get the money. Then we can forget all about it. He looked into her eyes and saw a complete lack of understanding, a void where empathy should have been. She didn't see the pressure he was under. She only saw the lifestyle it afforded her. The waitress in one 5-minute encounter had shown more insight into his reality than Tiffany had in the 2 years they'd been together. The thought was so jarring that he had to look away. I have to go, he said, pulling away from her touch. I need to prepare. Don't I get a kiss? She pouted. He gave her a brief perfunctory kiss on the cheek. It felt like kissing a mannequin. As he walked out of the apartment, the weight on his chest felt heavier than ever. Miles away in a different world, Alara Vance was also preparing. Her apartment, while modest, was a reflection of her mind, organized, efficient, and free of clutter. There was no sign of the waitress uniform she had worn for the last time, less than 12 hours ago. It was sealed in a bag destined for a charity bin, a skin she had shed. Draped across her bed was a charcoal gray power suit by Acris, a brand known for its architectural lines and understated authority. Beside it lay a simple cream-colored silk blouse and a pair of sensible but elegant black leather pumps. The ensemble was a statement, serious, feminine, and utterly uncompromising. She stood before a small mirror, not applying makeup but composing herself. She did what she always did before a critical negotiation. She remembered. She remembered the scent of sawdust in her grandfather's carpentry workshop in Gdansk, where he taught her that the strength of any structure is in its joints, the parts no one sees. She remembered the face of the university professor who told her that her mind was not suited for theoretical physics. She remembered the elation of writing the final line of code for Kestrel, the predictive analytics algorithm that had been her masterpiece, the one she sold for a sum that still felt abstract. She had built her fortune not with bravado, but with patience. She was a deep-sea predator, capable of moving slowly, almost invisibly for months, only to strike with blinding speed and precision when the moment was right. Her time as a waitress wasn't just due diligence on Oratech. It was a test for herself. Could she still disappear? Could she still listen when no one thought she was worth talking to? The answer was yes. She had learned more about New York's power dynamics from clearing tables and refilling water glasses than she ever could have from a boardroom. She had seen the city's elite with their guards down their true natures, exposed under the soft glow of restaurant lighting. Her phone buzzed. A message from Arthur. Car is downstairs. The wire is confirmed. The board is assembled. They are waiting for EV Capital. Elora took one last look in the mirror. The woman looking back was not Ella the waitress. This was Alara Vance. The accent was the same. The eyes were the same. But the power once carefully concealed was now worn like a mantle. She picked up a slim leather briefcase containing a single tablet and walked out the door, her heels clicking with quiet purpose on the linoleum floor of the hallway. The click echoed the countdown to a new era for Oratech. The Oratech boardroom on the 50th floor was a temple of anxiety. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a godlike view of the Manhattan skyline, but no one was looking. All eyes were on the gleaming mahogany table or the empty chair at its head. Julian sat at his designated spot, his leg bouncing nervously under the table. To his right was David Chen, the CFO, a brilliant but perpetually worried man who was currently pale enough to be translucent. The rest of the board members, a collection of grim-faced men and women who had known Julian's father, radiated disapproval. They smelled blood in the water. His blood. They're 5 minutes late, one of the board members, a stern woman named Helen Shaw, noted, tapping her pen on the table. The sound was like a hammer blow in the silent room. Their representative is on their way up now, David said, checking his phone for the 10th time in as many minutes. Security just badged them in. Julian straightened his tie, his mouth dry. This was it. He tried to project an aura of calm, of control, just as his father would have. But he felt like an imposter. He was a boy in a king's robes, and they were about to be stripped from him. "Do we even have a name yet?" Helen asked, her voice sharp. "Who are we actually meeting?" "The firm is EV Capital," David said, his eyes still glued to his phone. "The principal is Ilara Vance." The name meant nothing to any of them. Julian repeated it in his head. Ilara Vance. It was vaguely European, unfamiliar. The double doors to the boardroom opened with a soft, hydraulic hiss. A young assistant leaned in. "Mr. Croft, Ms. Vance is here." Everyone in the room shifted their posture, straightening their faces, arranging into masks of cautious welcome. They turned as one to face the door, and then she walked in. Time seemed to warp, to slow down and stretch like heated taffy. Julian's brain struggled to process the information his eyes were sending him. It was the waitress. She was not wearing a black apron. She was in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that commanded respect. Her hair was not in a tight, sensible bun. It was styled in a sleek, professional chignon. Her face, free of the weary politeness of a service worker, was set in an expression of calm, intelligent authority. She carried a slim leather briefcase instead of a water pitcher. But it was her. The same dark, observant eyes. The same quiet confidence. The same woman whose accent his girlfriend had so viciously mocked less than 12 hours before. A wave of vertigo washed over Julian. He felt the blood drain from his face. He could hear a faint ringing in his ears. Around the table, the other board members saw only a poised, impressive-looking woman. They had no context for the cataclysm that was unfolding inside their CEO's mind. David Chen, who had been sent a photo ID just moments before, was the only other person who looked slightly stunned, but he recovered quickly, rising to his feet. "Ms. Vance," David said, his voice a little shaky. "Welcome to Oratech. I'm David Chen, CFO. This is our CEO, Julian Croft, and our board of directors." Ilara's gaze swept across the room, acknowledging each person with a slight nod. Then her eyes landed on Julian. They held no malice, no triumph, not even a flicker of recognition of their previous encounter. It was something far more terrifying. It was the cool, appraising look of a biologist studying a specimen under a microscope. She walked to the head of the table, the empty chair that was waiting for her. She placed her briefcase on the mahogany surface with a soft, definitive click. "Good morning, gentlemen, Ms. Shaw," she said, her voice filling the silent room. The Polish accent was still there, a soft melody beneath the steel of her words. "I am Ilara Vance. Shall we begin?" The silence in the boardroom was a living entity. It was thick with the board's curiosity, David Chen's managed shock, and Julian Croft's spiraling disbelief. He felt as though the floor had given way, plunging him into a surreal nightmare. His mind kept trying to reconcile the two images, the woman in the waitress uniform holding a tray, and this woman in the actress suit holding the future of his company in her hands. They were the same person. It was impossible. It was happening. Ilara didn't wait for the shock to subside. She had the momentum, and she intended to press her advantage. She connected her tablet to the room's main display, and the Oratech logo was immediately replaced by a clean, minimalist slide deck bearing the EV Capital insignia. "I will not waste your time with pleasantries." She began, her voice calm and measured. She paced slowly before the screen, a general addressing her troops. "My firm has conducted an exhaustive multi-spectrum analysis of Oratech. The conclusion is twofold." She clicked to the next slide, which showed two columns. On the left, under the heading, Assets, were bullet points: Helios Neural IP, patented manufacturing processes, Tier 1 engineering talent. On the right, under Liabilities, the list was longer: inefficient supply chain, bloated executive payroll, lack of R&D innovation pipeline, and at the very bottom, in stark red letters, leadership deficit. Julian flinched as if he'd been struck. Leadership deficit. Tushinam, it was a direct, brutal assessment of his tenure. "Your assets are formidable." Ilara continued, her accent lending a precise, deliberate weight to each word. "The technology your father Robert Croft pioneered is generational. Your engineering team is without question one of the best in the world. But this company is a brilliant mind and a failing body. It is dying from 1,000 self-inflicted cuts." She moved through her presentation with surgical precision. She didn't just present problems, she deconstructed them. She knew their numbers better than they did. She pointed out redundancies in their German manufacturing plant that David Chen himself hadn't caught yet. She highlighted a specific clause in a supplier contract that was costing them 8% more than market rate. She even brought up a promising but underfunded internal R&D project, Project Nightingale, that Julian had barely remembered greenlighting. The board members were mesmerized. Their initial skepticism about this unknown investor was melting away, replaced by a dawning respect. This woman wasn't just bringing money. She had done her homework with a terrifying level of detail. They started to see her not as an outsider, but as someone who understood the company on a fundamental level. Julian could only watch a spectator at his own execution. Every point she made was a validation of his deepest fears, a confirmation of his own inadequacy. He wasn't running his father's company. He was presiding over its slow-managed decay. And this woman, this waitress, had seen it all from the outside. The shame was a physical burn at the back of his neck. Which brings us to the terms of my investment, Ilara said, arriving at her final slide. EV Capital is prepared to inject $250 million into Oratech. A collective, sharp intake of breath went around the room. The number was more than they had dared to hope for. It wasn't just a lifeline. It was a complete revitalization. This capital will be used to clear all outstanding debt, overhaul the supply chain, and triple the funding for the R&D division with an immediate focus on Project Nightingale, she stated. Helen Shaw, the stern board member, finally spoke, a glimmer of a smile on her face. Miss Vance, this is an incredibly generous offer. It is not an offer, Ms. Shaw, Ilara corrected her gently. It is a conditional proposal. The money comes with requirements. The slide changed again. The new heading was Conditions. Turn 1. 2 seats on the board for EV Capital representatives. This was standard. 2. Veto power over any new executive hires for 24 months. More aggressive but understandable. 3. A complete independent audit of all executive expense accounts from the past fiscal year. This caused some nervous shifting in seats. 4. The immediate termination of the company's contract with Davenport PR. Julian's head snapped up. Davenport PR, Tiffany's father's firm. The contract was a legacy handout, a piece of blatant nepotism he had maintained to keep Tiffany happy. It was worth millions a year for doing practically nothing. Before he could process that, the 5th and final condition appeared on the screen. 5. Julian Croft will remain as CEO on a 6-month probationary basis with performance benchmarks set and evaluated directly by me. Failure to meet these benchmarks will result in his immediate removal. The room fell into a stunned, absolute silence. It was a coup, a velvet coup executed with a checkbook and a slide deck. She wasn't just investing, she was taking control. She was putting a leash on him in front of his entire board. All the air went out of his lungs. It was at this precise, exquisitely tense moment that the double doors to the boardroom swung open again. This time it wasn't an assistant, it was Tiffany Davenport. She was a vision in a white Chanel dress, holding a large, expensive-looking bag from an upscale delicatessen. She beamed, oblivious to the atom bomb that had just detonated in the room. Surprise, she chirped, her voice echoing in the dead silence. I know you said not to, but I couldn't let my brilliant CEO starve during his big important meeting. I brought lunch for everyone. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in the grim faces. Her smile faltered for a second before she spotted Julian. Jules, you look like you've seen a ghost. Did you get the money? Of course you did. She started walking toward him, her heels clicking on the floor. And then as she neared the head of the table, she saw the woman who was standing there, the woman who was running the presentation. Her eyes widened. The color drained from her perfectly made-up face. The chipper smile dissolved into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. It was the waitress, the Polish girl, the one with the thick, funny accent. Tiffany stopped dead in her tracks. The heavy paper bag filled with artisanal sandwiches and overpriced salads slipped from her nerveless fingers. It hit the floor with a dull, wet thud, splitting open. A bottle of sparkling water rolled out and spun in a slow, wobbly circle on the polished floor. The sound in the dead silent room was like a gunshot. Tiffany's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Her gaze flickered between Ilara, serene and unmoved at the head of the table, and Julian, whose face was a study in absolute mortification. The entire boardroom was staring at her, then at Alara, then back again. The pieces of a puzzle they didn't know existed, suddenly clicking into place in their minds. Alara didn't say a word. She didn't have to. She just stood there, a silent testament to the colossal error in judgment Tiffany had made. Finally, Tiffany found her voice. It was a choked, strangled whisper. You... Alara simply raised an eyebrow, a gesture of cool inquiry. Desperately trying to regain control of a situation that had vaporized in her hands, Tiffany forced a laugh. It was a brittle, ugly sound. Well, look at this. Playing dress-up, are we? What is this, some kind of joke, Jules? Did you hire the catering staff to make a point? The comment was so profoundly stupid, so completely out of touch with the reality of the room that it was pitiful. Julian buried his face in his hands. Helen Shaw looked at Tiffany with the kind of disdain usually reserved for insects. Julian stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the floor. Tiffany, out, now! His voice was low and trembling, with a mixture of fury and shame. But Jewel, I don't understand. I said get out, he repeated, his voice cracking. He grabbed her by the arm, his grip far from gentle, and began pulling her toward the door. As he hauled her out, Tiffany looked back over her shoulder, her eyes wide with panic and confusion locking with Alara's. In that moment, she finally understood. This was not a joke. This was a reckoning. The insignificant little waitress she had tried to humiliate for sport was about to own the world her entire identity was built upon. Julian shoved her out into the hallway and slammed the doors shut, the sound reverberating through the boardroom. He leaned against the doors for a moment, his back to the room, his shoulders slumped in defeat. When he finally turned around, his face was ashen. He looked at the spilled lunch on the floor, at the stunned faces of his board, and finally at Alara Vance. Alara hadn't moved. Her expression was unchanged. She gestured subtly to the mess on the floor. Someone should probably clean that up, she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. Then she turned her attention back to the board. Now, regarding my conditions, are there any questions? The power dynamic had not just been shifted, it had been shattered and remade in her image. She was no longer the waitress. She was the architect of their future, and they were all, especially Julian Croft, living in her world now. The aftermath of Tiffany's catastrophic entrance hung in the air, a foul odor of social and professional implosion. The spilled sandwiches and arugula lay on the floor like battlefield casualties. An assistant was quickly and quietly summoned to clean up the mess, scurrying in and out with the hushed reverence of someone tidying a tomb. Through it all, Alara remained the unshakable center of gravity. She fielded questions from the board with an unnerving calm. Her answers were concise, data-driven, and irrefutable. When Helen Shaw questioned the severity of the probationary period for Julian, Alara answered without looking at him. A company does not find itself in this position by accident, Ms. Shaw. It is a result of 1,000 small compromises, of prioritizing comfort over performance, of allowing distractions to obscure foundational problems. A probationary period is not a punishment. It is a necessary diagnostic. It will reveal whether the current leadership is capable of the radical focus required to save this company, or if a change is needed. I am investing in Oratech's potential, not its status quo. Her words were for Helen, but the message was aimed squarely at Julian. I saw you make a small compromise last night. I saw you prioritize comfort over decency. I saw you get distracted. He understood with chilling clarity that this entire negotiation was on one level a direct response to his personal failings at Table 7. This wasn't just business. It was a lesson, and the tuition was his autonomy. The board, faced with the choice between a humiliating but survivable deal and certain bankruptcy, capitulated. They voted to accept all of EV Capital's conditions. It was unanimous. Julian was forced to vote in favor of his own probation. The ink on the digital agreement was barely dry before the board members filed out, leaving Julian and Alara alone in the vast silent room. The silence stretched thick with unspoken words. Julian stared at the gleaming mahogany table, unable to meet her gaze. The shame was a physical weight crushing him. Finally, he spoke, his voice hoarse. I am so sorry. Alara, who had been gathering her things, paused. For what specifically, Mr. Croft? For your company's dismal performance, for your lack of oversight, or for allowing your guest to treat a service worker like her personal plaything. Her directness was like a splash of ice water. For all of it, he admitted, finally looking up at her. Her face was impassive. Especially for last night, there is no excuse for my behavior for hers. I was weak and I was distracted. I apologize. Alara walked around the table until she was standing directly in front of him. She was shorter than him, but in that moment she seemed to tower over him. Your apology is noted, she said, her tone clinical. But let me be clear, I did not orchestrate this multi-million-dollar investment to teach you a lesson in etiquette. Your personal failings are your own. However, they provided me with valuable data. Data? He asked, confused. Yes, data, she confirmed. I don't invest in spreadsheets, Mr. Croft. I invest in people and the cultures they create. For 6 weeks, I worked at Celestine. I took the subway. I bought groceries. I listened. I wanted to understand the ecosystem in which Aratech existed unfiltered. I served coffee to your competitors. I poured wine for your bankers, and I served water to you. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. I learned that you are a man who is so besieged by the pressures of his legacy that he cannot see the problems right in front of him. You tolerate inefficiency, you tolerate sycophants, and you tolerate cruelty as long as it keeps your personal life quiet. That told me everything I needed to know about why Aratech is failing. You are not a bad man, Mr. Croft. You are, however, a dangerously complacent one. It was the most brutal performance review of his life delivered by the woman he had allowed to be humiliated just hours before. Every word was true. He had no defense. Why? He finally managed to ask. Why go through with the investment if you think I'm such a failure? Because I also saw your engineers meeting at a coffee shop on their own time, sketching new designs on napkins, because they believe in the work, she said, her voice softening for the first time. I overheard 2 of your junior analysts arguing passionately about your market position while they were on a dinner date, and I know that the Helios technology your father created has the potential to change the world for people with degenerative neurological conditions. The soul of this company is still alive, Mr. Croft. It is just being suffocated by poor leadership. I am not investing in you. I am investing in them. You are simply the variable I need to manage. The door to the boardroom opened, and Arthur Finch, her lawyer, stepped in with a briefcase full of hard copies. He nodded politely to Julian and set the documents in front of Alara. The moment of private confrontation was over. It was back to business. Julian left the boardroom in a daze. As he walked through the hushed, open-plan office, he could feel the eyes of his employees on him. The news had already begun to filter through the corporate grapevine. The company was saved, but the CEO was on a leash. He felt their relief, but also their pity. He found Tiffany in his office. She had been crying. Her makeup was a wreck. The moment she saw him, she stood up. Jules, this is insane. You have to do something. You can't let that waitress do this to you. To us, my father's PR contract. How could you let her do that? He looked at her, and the last vestiges of his affection for her crumbled into dust. All she could see was her own loss. The money, the status. She had no concept of the humiliation he had just endured, a humiliation she had directly caused. She's not a waitress, Tiffany. She's Alara Vance. She's the new majority investor in this company. But how? She stammered. She's Polish. The sheer, unfiltered bigotry of the statement struck Julian with the force of a physical blow. It was the final straw. That's it, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. We're done. What do you mean we're done? She shrieked, her voice rising in panic. You can't do this, not after everything done. He repeated, his voice colder and harder than he had ever heard it. You are a cruel, shallow person, Tiffany. I knew it and I tolerated it. That's on me. But I won't anymore. Your thoughtless cruelty last night cost me my company's autonomy and my own self-respect. You are the most expensive dinner I have ever had. He walked to his desk and buzzed security. Please escort Ms. Davenport from the building. Julian, no, she pleaded, tears now streaming freely down her face. Don't do this, I love you. He looked at her one last time, at the beautiful face contorted by panic, and he felt nothing but a profound, weary emptiness. No, you don't, he said softly. You love what I provide. and I'm no longer sure I can afford it. He watched as security guards politely but firmly led her away, her protests echoing down the hall. The door to his office clicked shut, and for the first time in years, Julian Croft was completely, terrifyingly, and blessedly alone. He sank into his chair, the view of the city spreading out before him, and understood that his real work, the work of rebuilding his company and himself, was just beginning. The lesson had been delivered. Now came the long, arduous process of paying for it. The 6 months that followed were the most grueling and transformative of Julian Croft's life. Ilara Vance was not an absentee investor. She was a presence. She didn't take an office at Oratech, but her influence was everywhere. The 2 board seats she controlled were filled by herself and a fearsome German-born efficiency expert named Klaus Richter, who descended upon the company's operations like a hawk. The executive payroll was trimmed. The fat, the legacy hires, the friends of the family all were politely but firmly shown the door. The Davenport PR contract was terminated, replaced by a hungry young firm that delivered twice the results for a third of the cost. The audit of expense accounts led to 3 quiet resignations and a new rigorously enforced company policy. The culture of complacency was being systematically dismantled brick by painful brick. Julian, under the terms of his probation, was at the epicenter of it all. Ilara's performance benchmarks were demanding and relentlessly focused on results, not optics. They had weekly video calls, clinical and direct meetings where he would report on his progress. In the beginning, he chafed under her authority, feeling like a subordinate in the company he was meant to lead. He made mistakes. He reverted to old habits. And each time she would calmly but surgically point out his error, not with anger, but with the dispassionate logic that had become her trademark. "You approved the marketing budget without seeing the final analytics from the European trial, Julian," she said during one call. "That is a decision based on hope, not data. We are no longer in the hope business." Slowly, painfully, he began to change. Stripped of the sycophants and the social distractions embodied by Tiffany, he was forced to engage with his work on a level he never had before. He started spending less time in the executive suite and more time on the factory floor and in the R&D labs. He learned the names of his engineers. He listened to their frustrations and their brilliant, unpolished ideas. He discovered a passion for the work itself, for the intricate problems of technology and logistics that he never knew he had. He was his father's son after all. The potential had always been there, buried under layers of insecurity and inherited privilege. Ilara wasn't teaching him. She was creating the harsh environment in which he was forced to teach himself. His focus shifted entirely to Project Nightingale, the underfunded R&D initiative Ilara had identified. It was a next-generation neural interface designed to help restore motor function to paralyzed patients. It was ambitious, expensive, and incredibly difficult. It was also the most meaningful work he had ever done. At the end of the 6 months, a week before his probationary period was set to expire, Julian called a full company town hall. He stood before his employees not as the heir, but as a leader who had been through the fire. He laid out the company's turnaround with brutal honesty, the painful cuts, the strategic shifts, and the new disciplined focus. Then he unveiled the first working prototype of the Nightingale interface. He played a video of a trial patient, a young woman who had been paralyzed from the waist down in a car accident, taking her first halting steps using the device. A collective gasp, followed by applause, filled the auditorium. Ilara was there, standing at the back of the room, unannounced. She watched the presentation, her expression unreadable. She saw the genuine passion in Julian's eyes. She saw the pride on the faces of the engineers he personally credited. She saw a company that was no longer dying. It was being reborn. Later that day, she summoned him to the boardroom where it had all begun. "Your probation is over," she said without preamble. Julian stood a little taller. "And the board has voted to retain you as CEO. The vote was unanimous, my vote included." A wave of relief so profound it almost buckled his knees washed over him. He had done it. He had earned his place. "Thank you, Ilara." He used her first name for the first time. She gave a small nod. "You did the work, Julian. Do not thank me. Now the real work begins. Nightingale needs to move from prototype to production. The competition is not sleeping." "I know," he said, a new confidence in his voice. "I've already drafted a 5-year strategic plan. I'd like to walk you through it." As he began to speak, laying out a vision for the future that was ambitious but grounded in data and realism, Ilara watched him. The man standing before her was not the same one she had met at Celestine. The haunted, distracted look was gone, replaced by the clear-eyed focus of a leader. He had shed his own dead skin. Her investment had paid off. A few months later, Ilara was visiting New York again. On a whim, she walked past Celestine. She saw a new waitress with a familiar, weary look on her face, serving a wealthy couple. A new Tiffany and a new Julian, perhaps. The world kept turning. Her phone rang. It was Julian. "I have something to show you," he said, his voice buzzing with excitement. "Are you free? It's at the R&D campus." She agreed. When she arrived, he wasn't in a conference room. He was in a lab wearing a white coat over his suit. He led her to an observation window. In the room below, the young woman from the video was walking on a treadmill, her movements becoming smoother, more confident. "Her name is Sarah," Julian said quietly, standing beside Ilara. "She was told she'd never walk again. Her progress it's everything. It's why my father started this company." They watched in comfortable silence for a few minutes. "You know," Julian said, turning to her, "I never properly thanked you, not just for the money, but for the wake-up call. It was a harsh lesson, but I needed it." Ilara finally allowed herself a genuine warm smile. It transformed her face. "In my country there is a saying," she said, her accent a familiar, comforting sound to him now. "A bitter medicine is the one that cures." "I am glad you are feeling better, Julian." He smiled back. "So am I." He looked at her, at the quiet strength in her eyes, and saw not an investor, not a former waitress, but a partner. The foundation of their relationship, born in a moment of humiliation and shame, had been rebuilt into something strong, professional, and filled with a profound mutual respect. Together they were going to make Oratech fly, not because of a legacy, but because they had both in their own ways earned the right to do so. And so a story that began with a sneer in a high-end restaurant ends with a step towards a new future. It's a powerful reminder that worth is never determined by a job title, a bank account, or the accent with which someone speaks. True power lies in integrity, intelligence, and the courage to see the world not just for what it is, but for what it could be. Ilara Vance didn't just invest her money, she invested her belief that even a failing company and a failing man could be redeemed with a sharp dose of reality. Julian Croft learned that leadership isn't an inheritance. It's a responsibility that must be earned every single day. What do you think is the most powerful lesson from this story? Was it Ilara's quiet strength or Julian's painful but necessary transformation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramatic stories that make you think. Thank you for listening.